It's time to set those winning Week 11 fantasy football lineups. So I'm bringing in Michael Fabiano, our senior fantasy analyst, to get us started. Who are you starting at quarterback this week, Fabs?
I'm bringing in the good luck Tony Dorsett jersey from the late 1970s for this edition of Stardom and Sit 'em. And let's go with Jared Goff. He was great last week. He was on the road, and I told you to play him, and he was fantastic. Now he's at home against the Bears. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that for Jared Goff. 6 quarterbacks have gone over 20 fantasy points against Chicago. So start Goff and start CJ Stroud. He is doing something that most rookie quarterbacks do not, and that is make an immediate impact from a fantasy perspective without being mobile. This is a guy who doesn't run much, but he's been great as a passer. He's got a really good matchup this week against the Arizona Cardinals. They've given up 19 or more fantasy points to quarterbacks 4 times, including Daniel Jones, Brock Purdy, and Deshaun Watson. So CJ Stroud is in my top 10 quarterbacks this week, Jen.
At the beginning of the season, it would have been hard to predict that you would sit these quarterbacks for those guys.
Trevor Lawrence has just not been a very good fantasy quarterback. Last week he had 2 points. And by the way, he was a sit-em right here with Jen and I. And I don't love him this week against the Tennessee Titans. They've allowed an average of fewer than 15 fantasy points to quarterbacks over their last 4 games. And Lawrence is not someone I can just trust. Even in a 2 QB league, he's not been very good. And let's go to Deshaun Watson, who's been more often good than bad from a fantasy perspective. Not a great game last week, but respectable. But he's got the Steelers this week. This is a very tough defense. They've allowed just 2 quarterbacks to beat them for more than 17 points, and only 1 has scored more than 20. So beware Deshaun Watson this week in what could be a lower scoring game.
I hope that jersey is super magical because you're saying go ahead and start Tony Pollard this weekend.
I can't believe that I even have to put him in my column, no less in this video, because he was a first-round pick. But do you know that Tony Pollard has scored single digits in 5 of his last 6 games? And this guy hasn't scored a touchdown since like the Clinton administration. It's been awful. But he's playing the Panthers this week. If he can't do it against the Panthers, he's never going to do it. Their defense has allowed 15-plus fantasy points to 8 running backs. 5 have gone over 20. Tony Pollard, this is your time to shine. And I'm going to give you another struggling running back, Aaron Jones. He's had 1 good game in the last 5 games, but he's got the lightning bolts this week. Their defense has given up double digits to 10 different running backs, including 7 who've gone over 16 points. The Chargers are not good against the run. Let's start Aaron Jones.
The Steelers seem to have found their identity and a way to win, and it's by running the ball. Yet you say Najee Harris is not necessarily a start this weekend.
I don't love him. And I understand that the matchup is not great. And I understand that he's been good the last 3 or 4 weeks. But the problem is Cleveland's defense is really tough, especially at home. They have given up the 5th fewest fantasy points to road running backs, which means what? Running backs who come to Cleveland do not do well. I like Jaylen Warren more because he's more versatile than I like Najee Harris. So if you have depth, I would fade him. The good news is that his schedule gets a lot better. And then Isaiah Pacheco coming off a bye. I don't love the matchup against the Eagles. Their defense is nasty good against running backs. In fact, no defense has given up fewer yards and fewer fantasy points than the Philadelphia Eagles. And really, there's only been 1 running back to have a truly big game against them, and that's Breece Hall. Isaiah Pacheco is a fade for me this week.
All right, let's jump over to the wideout position. Who are we firing up this weekend?
Let's go with scary Terry McLaurin, who last week did not have a great game, but typically he's given you like a 12 to 13 point floor. His ceiling's probably around 18 points. He's got the Giants this week who just gave up like all the points to CeeDee Lamb last week and Brandon Cooks. I mean, it was ridiculous. The Giants are a mess. They're a JV team in the NFL right now. So start Terry McLaurin. And I like Brandon Ayuk. I was kind of expecting more last week. He had 3 catches, but he had a touchdown and double-digit points. So it was a fine output. I think he'll be better this week against the Buccaneers. Their defense has given up 5 touchdowns and the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks.
Okay, you're sitting 2 wide receivers that have struggled the last couple weeks. You say the receivers will continue to struggle this weekend.
Yeah, beware Adam Thielen. The carriage has kind of turned back into a pumpkin. Like he was so good earlier in the season. The last couple of weeks has not really been great. The Cowboys defense has allowed the 2nd fewest fantasy points to wide receivers and the 6th fewest to slot receivers. That's a problem for Adam Thielen. He may get some garbage time love. I know you probably got to play him. This is probably more for DFS. And then George Pickens, who we told you to not play last week. And guess what? He had a stink bomb. Remember I told you how good the Browns are on the defensive side in Cleveland? Yeah, this is even better in terms of the wide receivers. They've allowed no touchdowns and the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers on the road this year, which means they are damn good at home. Fade George Pickens.
Kyler Murray returned last Sunday, and I have to say, he looked better than I thought he would, and he looked really good as far as this tight end's fantasy stock.
And again, we told you to play Trey McBride last week, and he was phenomenal, better than I thought. 21 points. He scored 20-plus points in 2 of his last 3 games. He's been very good without Zach Ertz, and he's got a good matchup against the Texans. Their defense has allowed 9-plus points to 6 different tight ends, including Tanner Hudson, Kylan Grayson, and Kate Otten. And those guys are not superstars. Start Trey McBride and start Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet's been really good over the last couple of weeks. 9-plus points in 3 straight games. 2 of those games, he went over 17. He's been getting into the end zone. This could be a negative game script for Chicago. And the Lions, they've given up the 7th most points to tight ends. So Cole Kmet is in my top 12.
All right, let's look at the sit list. Who are you sitting for tight end?
I've got Evan Engram on this list, and I get it. I mean, you probably got to play him. Just keep in mind, the Titans are really good against tight ends. In fact, only one, Mark Andrews, has scored double digits against Tennessee, and he only had 10.9 points. So beware Evan Engram this week, and beware David Njoku. I was wrong about him last week. I didn't love the matchup. He had another good game, and he's actually been one of the more consistent tight ends in fantasy football over the last month. But the last time he played the Steelers, he was held under 7 points, and Pittsburgh's defense has allowed 1 touchdown and the 5th fewest points to tight ends. So Njoku, even though you may have to play him, well, I would temper my expectations.
There you have it, folks. There's your cheat sheet for who to start and sit for this weekend. But for complete details, be sure to visit us at si.com/fantasy.